On his 18th birthday, a young man is thrown out with nothing but the keys to his late father's worthless feed store. But what he discovers inside is an inheritance of truth that will force him to fight for his family's legacy. If you've ever felt lost or been told you're not worth much, this story is for you. Stick around, and if it hits home, maybe give that subscribe button a click, because we're building a community here for people who've had to find their own way. The key felt wrong in my hand. It was too old, too heavy. Cast iron, pitted with rust, its teeth worn smooth like an old dog's. It didn't look like it could open anything. It looked like something you'd find at the bottom of a river, a forgotten piece of a forgotten story. My stepmother, Karen, had dropped it into my palm with the same indifferent flick she used to toss junk mail onto the counter. "Happy birthday, Leo," she'd said, her voice as flat as the gray morning sky. "You're an adult now." "This is yours." She didn't mean the key. She meant the door, the one leading out of her life. The finality of it was a physical thing, a pressure in the air of the pristine living room where I had never once felt at home. 2 years. 2 years of tiptoeing around her moods. 2 years of eating my meals alone in the kitchen. 2 years of sleeping in a room that still felt like a guest room. It was over. The box she'd pushed across the polished floor with her foot contained the sum of my life before her. A few worn paperbacks, a framed photo of me and my dad on a fishing trip, his old watch that had stopped working the day he died, and a thick manila envelope. Inside that was the deed to something called Tom's Feed and Seed in a town I'd never heard of, Sparrow Creek. And taped to the deed, this key. "It's worthless," Karen had added, almost as an afterthought, as she stood with her arms crossed, blocking the path to the rest of the house. "Your father sank every last penny he had into it before, well, it's a ruin. But the property taxes are paid up for the year. Consider that my final gift." A gift. The word hung in the air between us, sour and absurd. The bus ticket in my pocket, a one-way fare to a dot on a map, felt more honest. It wasn't a gift. It was an eviction notice. I didn't argue. There was no one to argue with, not really. Karen wasn't a person to me anymore. She was a system. A set of rules I had to navigate until the clock ran out. And it just had. So I picked up the box, slung my backpack over my shoulder, and walked out the door without looking back. The lock clicked behind me with a sound of absolute precision, a sound of a life being surgically removed. Now, hours later, the bus engine was a low drone that vibrated through the worn seat and up into my bones. Outside the smudged window, the city had bled away, replaced by sprawling suburbs, then patches of farmland, and finally the dense, unbroken green of the countryside. Each mile felt like a year, pulling me further from the only life I'd known and deeper into a future that was a complete and terrifying blank. I clutched the key in my pocket. It was the only solid thing in my world. Worthless. Maybe, but it was mine. It was the only thing that was mine. The bus sighed to a stop in what I assumed was the center of Sparrow Creek. It wasn't so much a station as a patch of gravel next to a tired-looking bench and a single, flickering street lamp that was already on, even in the late afternoon. The driver grunted, "End of the line, kid," and I was the only one to get off. The air hit me first. It was thick, smelling of damp earth, cut grass, and something else, something faintly sweet and dusty, like hay in a hot barn. It was the opposite of the city's sharp, metallic tang. I stood there for a long moment, my backpack feeling impossibly heavy, the cardboard box digging into my hip. The town was quiet, not empty, but quiet. A few pickup trucks were parked along the main street. A woman with a grocery bag gave me a brief, curious glance as she walked past. The silence wasn't hostile, just watchful. I looked at the address on the deed again. 114 River Street. A man stacking newspapers outside a small general store pointed me in the right direction without even being asked. "Looking for the old feed store?" he'd said, his eyes crinkling. "Just down past the bridge. Can't miss it. Hasn't been open in years." He said it kindly, but the subtext was clear. What in the world would you want with that old place? My anxiety, which had been a low hum on the bus, spiked into a sharp thrum against my ribs. Karen's voice echoed in my head. A ruin. Worthless. What was I doing here? I had about $200 to my name, a box of memories, and a rusty key to a place everyone seemed to agree was a lost cause. For a split second, I thought about getting back on the next bus, going anywhere else. But where? The key in my pocket felt heavier, like an anchor. It was the only direction I had. So I adjusted my grip on the box and started walking. River Street ran parallel to a slow-moving, dark-water creek. The bridge was a simple, sturdy-looking stone structure, and just beyond it, I saw it. "Can't miss it" was an understatement. The building sagged. It wasn't just old, it was tired. It looked like it had given up. The paint, once probably a cheerful barn red, had peeled and faded to a blotchy, sun-bleached pink. The large display windows on the ground floor were boarded over with weathered plywood. Above them, in letters that were barely legible, were the words, "Tom's Feed and Seed." My father's name. A wave of something hot and painful washed over me. He'd stood here. He'd put his name on this building. He'd had a dream for it. And now it was this, a monument to his failure. I dropped the box on the cracked sidewalk and just stared. The roof had a visible dip in the middle, like a sway-backed horse. Weeds grew thick and tenacious from every crack in the foundation. It wasn't just worthless. It was a burden, a dead weight. My inheritance was a ghost. I walked up the 2 shallow wooden steps to the front door. They groaned under my weight, and I half expected to fall through. The door was solid oak, but the wood was dry and splintered. The lock was a big, brass plate, green with tarnish. I pulled out the iron key. My hand was trembling slightly as I pushed it into the keyhole. It scraped, resisted. For a moment, I was sure it was the wrong key, another one of Karen's cruel jokes. I jiggled it, pushed harder, and then, with a deep, groaning clunk that seemed to echo from the very bones of the building, the lock turned. The sound was so loud in the quiet street that I flinched, looking over my shoulder. No one was there. It was just me and the ghost. I took a deep breath, the dusty air catching in my throat, and pushed the door open. It swung inward on protesting hinges, opening a slice of pure, unadulterated darkness into the afternoon light. The smell that rolled out was overwhelming. It was the smell of time itself. Dust, mold, decaying paper, the faint, phantom scent of grain and fertilizer, and something else, the dry, papery smell of mice. It was the smell of absolute neglect. I hesitated on the threshold, my heart pounding. This was it. The start of my new life. A dark, empty, forgotten room. I stepped inside, leaving the door open to let the daylight spill in. It didn't get far. The interior was cavernous, much bigger than it looked from the outside. Light from the open door illuminated a universe of floating dust motes. Tall shelves, empty now, lined the walls, reaching up into the shadowy ceiling. A thick layer of gray dust coated everything. The long wooden counter that ran the length of one wall, the overturned sacks piled in a corner, the old-fashioned cash register with its keys frozen in place. It was like walking onto a movie set for a post-apocalyptic film where everything was suddenly abandoned mid-motion. The air was so still you could almost hear it. I set my box down on the counter, the sound muffled by the dust. My backpack slid to the floor with a soft thud. I was home. The thought was so bleak it was almost funny. A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips, a puff of sound that was immediately swallowed by the silence. I ran a finger along the counter, leaving a clean, dark streak in the grime. Underneath, the wood was solid, scarred with years of use. My dad did this, I thought. He stood here. He sold bags of seed and talked to farmers about the weather. The idea felt alien, from a life I couldn't imagine. The man I remembered from my childhood was an urban creature, a construction foreman who smelled of sawdust and concrete, who came home tired and covered in a different kind of dust. This place, this rural dream, must have been his escape, or his final, desperate gamble. I started to explore, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. The main room was for sales, that much was clear. Behind the counter, a door led to a small, cramped office. Here, the dust was even thicker. A heavy wooden desk sat against one wall, a Rolodex on its corner fanned out like a dead bird. The chair was knocked over. A calendar on the wall was still turned to August, 2 years ago, the month he died. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the building ran down my spine. It felt like he had just walked out. I tried to open the desk drawers, but they were locked. All of them. Frustrated, I gave one a hard yank, but it wouldn't budge. Everything was sealed. Everything was held in suspension. I left the office and moved toward the back of the store, where a set of wide double doors led to what must have been the warehouse area. These doors were barred from my side with a heavy wooden plank. It took all my strength to lift it out of its iron brackets. As I heaved it aside, it clattered to the floor, the noise a deafening explosion in the quiet. I froze, listening, my heart hammering. But again, only silence answered. The warehouse was even darker, a vast black space. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the gloom, revealing stacks of what looked like pallets, shrouded in tarps like sleeping giants. Mountains of sacks were piled high, some of which had split open, spilling their contents onto the concrete floor. The air here was drier, and the smell of grain was stronger. I prodded one of the sacks with my foot. It was hard as a rock. Whatever was in them was long past saving. Worthless. Karen was right about everything, it seemed. I swept the flashlight beam across the room, and it caught something. A glint of metal. On the far wall, almost hidden behind a leaning stack of empty crates, was a heavy-duty steel door. A walk-in safe? In a feed store? That seemed odd. It had a combination dial, the numbers faded. I had no idea what the combination could be. It was another dead end. I was starting to feel a deep, crushing despair. The hope I'd clung to, the tiny ember that the key represented, was being extinguished by the sheer, overwhelming reality of this place. It wasn't just neglected, it was dead. And I was trapped here with its corpse. I trudged back to the office, my feet dragging. The single window was grimy, looking out onto a back alley choked with weeds. There was no beauty here, no hidden charm, just decay. I sat down on the dusty floor, my back against the desk, and pulled my knees to my chest. The silence pressed in on me. This was the inheritance my father had left me. Not a business, but a tomb. A testament to his failure, a place for me to come and fail too. I felt a familiar sting behind my eyes, the grief for my dad that was always just below the surface, now mixed with a bitter dose of anger. Why would he leave me this? Why would he saddle me with a ruin in the middle of nowhere? As I sat there, stewing in my own misery, my foot bumped against something. I'd kicked up the edge of a small, worn-out rug that lay in the middle of the floor. Underneath it, the floorboards looked different. One of them seemed slightly raised, its edges cleaner than the others around it. My curiosity, a stubborn flicker that refused to die completely, was peaked. I leaned forward and pried at the edge with my fingernails. It was loose. With a little effort, I was able to lift the board completely free. And there, nestled in the dark space below, was a metal box. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a shoebox, but it was heavy and solid. A simple cash box, painted black, with a small lock. It wasn't locked. I lifted it out. It was cold to the touch. My breath caught in my throat. This was different. This wasn't decay. This was deliberate. This was hidden. I sat there for a full minute, just looking at it, the weight of it in my lap. Then, with trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money. There was just a single, thick envelope made of heavy, cream-colored paper. My name was written on the front in my father's familiar, strong handwriting. Leo, on your 18th birthday. My heart stopped. This was it. This was the real inheritance. Not the building, not the dust. This. A message from the dead. I lifted the envelope out. It felt impossibly heavy, as if it were filled with lead instead of paper. For a long time, I just held it, turning it over and over in my hands. Part of me didn't want to open it. As long as it was sealed, my dad was still just a memory. A man who died in a tragic accident. Once I read his words, everything might change. The story I had been telling myself for 2 years might fall apart. But I had to know. I had come all this way. I had nothing left to lose. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tear the seal. I unfolded the pages. There were several of them, covered in his dense script. I took a deep breath, the dusty air of the office filling my lungs, and began to read. My dear Leo, it started. If you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, happy birthday, son. You're 18, a man. I'm so sorry I'm not there to say that to your face. I am so proud of the person I knew you were becoming. The second thing it means is that I'm gone. And it means I didn't die by accident. The words leaped off the page and punched the air from my lungs. I had to read the sentence 3 times before it registered. I didn't die by accident. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. The whole narrative of my life for the past 2 years, the grief, the acceptance, the story of a scaffold collapse and a terrible tragedy, cracked down the middle. I don't have much time to write this, the letter continued, so I have to be direct. The company I worked for, Titan Construction, is rotten to the core. You've heard of them. They build everything. Skyscrapers, bridges, government contracts. They're powerful. And they're killers. For the last year, I've been gathering proof. They've been cutting corners on a massive scale, using substandard steel in high-rises, sheeping out on concrete mix for bridge supports. People are going to die, Leo. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, when one of these projects fails. I found the documents, the supply chain fraud, the falsified safety reports. I made copies of everything. I went to my boss, thinking he was a good man. He wasn't. He was one of them. That was my mistake. Now they know I know. They're not the kind of people who leave loose ends. They've been following me. I can feel them getting closer. I'm not a fool. I know I'm not going to walk away from this. My hands were slick with sweat. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. This wasn't my dad. My dad was a foreman. He liked fishing and bad jokes. He wasn't some kind of spy in a thriller novel. But the handwriting was his. The voice was his. I kept reading. So I made a plan. A way to protect you, and a way for the truth to survive. This feed store, I know Karen told you it was a failed dream. That's what I wanted her and everyone else to think. I bought it under the radar a while back. It's my safe house, my fortress of solitude, he wrote, and a ghost of a smile touched my lips. He always loved Superman. I've made it look as worthless and dilapidated as possible. No one would ever think to look for anything of value here. The company, Karen, they'll think my only asset is a pile of rubble. They'll let you have it. They'll kick you out with it, thinking they're washing their hands of you. That's the plan. The cold calculation of it stunned me. He had orchestrated this, my eviction, my journey here. It wasn't abandonment. It was a strategy. It was a chess move from beyond the grave. Now, you have a choice, Leo. And it's the most important choice of your life. I hate that I have to put this on you, but I don't have anyone else I can trust. In the warehouse, behind the sacks of spoiled grain, you'll find another surprise. Look for the bags of special blend alfalfa. They're not alfalfa. It's where I hid my life savings, every cent I ever made. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough for you to disappear. You can take that money, walk away from this town, this building, all of it. Go to college, travel the world, build a life for yourself. Forget you ever read this letter. No one would blame you. I wouldn't blame you. That is option 1. Freedom. I paused, my mind reeling. Money. A way out. A clean slate. It was everything I had been dreaming of on the bus. An escape. But there was more. I knew there was more. Option 2, the letter went on, is harder. Much harder. In the big safe in the warehouse, the one that looks like it hasn't been opened in a century, is all the evidence I collected. The documents, the hard drives, the proof. The combination is your mother's birthday, the day we met, August 15th, 79. You'll also need to talk to a man in this town named Arthur Abernathy. He's a lawyer, the old-fashioned kind, honest. His office is on Main Street, above the bakery. He doesn't know the details, but I told him a young man might come to him one day with a difficult problem, and I asked him to listen. He was my father's friend. He can be trusted. If you choose this path, you give him the evidence. You finish what I started. But Leo, you have to understand. If you do this, you will be painting a target on your own back. Titan Construction will not go down quietly. They will come after you. They will try to silence you, just like they silenced me. This path is not safe. It's a fight. A long, dangerous, and thankless fight. That is option 2, justice. He finished the letter by telling me he loved me. He told me that whatever I chose, he would be proud of me. He said that the greatest gift a father can give his son is the freedom to choose his own path. The letter ended simply with, "Your dad." I let the pages fall into my lap. The silence of the office was no longer empty. It was filled with his voice, with the weight of his words, with the impossible choice he had laid at my feet. Freedom or justice. Run or fight. Disappear or become a target. I leaned my head back against the desk and closed my eyes, but all I could see were the words, burned into my vision. I didn't die by accident. For 2 years, I had grieved a victim of tragedy. Now I had to grieve a soldier who had fallen in a war I didn't even know he was fighting. The grief was different now. It was sharper, laced with a terrible, burning anger. They hadn't just taken my father, they had murdered him. They had stolen him from me and covered it up with a lie. I sat there in the dark, dusty office for hours as the sun went down, the single slice of light from the front door fading from gold to orange to a deep, bruised purple. The weight of it all was crushing. I was 18 years old. I was supposed to be worrying about what to do with my life, not how to avenge my father's death and take down a corrupt corporate empire. The fear was a living thing inside me, a cold knot in my stomach. They had killed him, a strong, smart man. What chance did I have? A scared kid with $200 and a box of memories. The impulse to take the money and run was overwhelming. It was the sensible choice, the sane choice. It was the choice my father himself had offered me, free and clear. I could be on a plane to somewhere warm and anonymous by the end of the week. I could forget Sparrow Creek, forget the feed store, forget the name Titan Construction. I could live. But could I? Could I live with the knowledge of what they'd done? Could I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, knowing that I had run away, knowing that I had let my father's last fight count for nothing? I thought about Karen's smug, cold face as she kicked me out. She was part of it somehow. Maybe she didn't know the details, but she benefited. She got the house, the insurance money, a life of comfort built on the foundations of my father's death. The thought of her, of them, getting away with it, clean and easy, made my blood boil. I cried then. Not loud, racking sobs, but silent, hot tears that tracked clean paths through the grime on my cheeks. I cried for my dad, for the years he'd lost, for the fact that he had to face his end alone, writing a letter to his son in a dusty back room. I cried for the boy I had been, who believed in accidents and simple tragedies. And I cried for the man I was supposed to become, who now had to face a choice that felt too big for any one person to carry. The room was pitch black now. My phone was dying. I didn't move. I just sat on the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my father's last days, and let the full weight of his legacy settle onto my shoulders. This building wasn't a tomb, it was an armory. And the choice wasn't about freedom versus justice, it was about who I was going to be. Was I my father's son, or was I just another person who looked the other way? And you know, this is the kind of moment that defines a life. Maybe you've had one. A crossroads so sharp and so sudden you feel like you can't possibly choose. A moment where the easy path is right there, calling to you, and the hard path looks like it leads straight off a cliff. If you've made it this far into my story, maybe it's because you know what that feels like. The weight of a choice that could change everything. I'm going to keep reading every comment you all leave, because hearing your stories, your moments of choice, it reminds me that none of us are alone in this. So if you're getting something from this, consider subscribing. Let's get back to the story. Sometime in the deep, silent hours of the morning, I must have fallen asleep, slumped against the desk. I woke up stiff, cold, and with a crick in my neck, to the pale gray light of dawn filtering through the dirty office window. My first conscious thought was of the letter. It wasn't a dream, it was all real. And in the clear, cold light of a new day, the choice was suddenly, terrifyingly simple. There was no choice at all. I couldn't run. I wouldn't. I unfolded my cramped legs and stood up, my joints protesting. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The fear was still there, a low thrum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by something new: purpose. For the first time in 2 years, I knew exactly what I had to do. My first stop was the warehouse. I didn't bother with the main doors this time. The office window looked out onto the back alley. It was painted shut, but a few solid shoves with my shoulder broke the seal with a groan. I squeezed through, dropping into the weed-choked alleyway. The back of the warehouse had a smaller, standard-sized door. It was locked, but the lock was old and rusted. A few well-aimed kicks near the knob, and the frame splintered, the door swinging inward. I was in. Inside, the warehouse was just as I remembered it from the night before, a cavern of shadows. I used my phone's dying light to navigate. I found the stacks of sacks just as he'd described. Most were labeled cracked corn or oat blend. Then I saw them, tucked away in a corner, a neat stack of about 20 bags. The printing on them was slightly different, the color a deeper green. Special blend alfalfa. My heart started to pound. I dragged one of the sacks into a patch of weak morning light. It was heavy, and it didn't feel like alfalfa. I fumbled in my pocket for the small pocket knife my dad had given me years ago, another relic from the box. I sliced open the burlap. It wasn't grain. It was cash. Bundles of it wrapped in rubber bands. Stacks of 20s, 50s, and 100s packed tight. I just stared. I pulled another bag and another. They were all the same. It was an impossible amount of money, more than I had ever seen in my life. My father's life savings converted to anonymous cash and hidden in plain sight. Option 1. Freedom. It was right here in my hands. I could take it and walk away, and no one would ever know. I sank down onto a pile of sacks, a bundle of $100 bills in my hand. It felt like paper. Just paper. It didn't feel like freedom. It felt like blood money. The price of my silence. Slowly, deliberately, I placed the bundle back in the sack. I would need some of this, for food, for supplies, for the lawyer. But it wasn't getaway money anymore. It was a war chest. Next, the safe. It was on the far wall, just as I remembered, a black iron behemoth. It looked ancient. I wiped the dust off the dial. The numbers were faded but legible. My mother's birthday, the day they met, August 15th, 79. I had never known that. My mom died when I was very young, and Dad rarely spoke of her. It hurt too much. But he remembered this date. He had encoded it into the heart of his last stand. It felt sacred. My hand trembled as I turned the dial. Right to 8. Left past it twice to 15. Right to 79. I pulled the heavy handle. For a moment, nothing happened. I thought I'd done it wrong. I pulled again, with all my weight, and with a deep, groaning sound of metal on metal that hadn't moved in years, the bolts retracted. The massive door swung open an inch. I had to pry it the rest of the way. The air that came out was cool and dry. Inside, it was neatly organized. There were 3 plastic document cases, the kind lawyers use, labeled simply A, B, and C. Beside them sat 2 external hard drives. And on top of it all, another, smaller envelope with my name on it. I opened that one first. It was a short note. Leo, this is the proof. Don't look at it. Don't copy it. Just give it all to Abernathy. The less you know, the safer you are. Trust him. Trust the plan. Love, Dad. The warning was stark. He was still protecting me, even now. I didn't hesitate. I closed the safe door, though I couldn't lock it again, and gathered the cases and hard drives. They felt heavy, not just with their physical weight, but with the lives they represented, my father's, and the ones he was trying to save. I carried them back to the office and hid them under the floorboard where I'd found the first letter, replacing the board and the rug. They would be safe there for now. It was time to see the lawyer. I took a few bundles of cash from one of the sacks, stuffing them into my backpack. It felt strange to be carrying so much money. I made my way back out the front door, closing and locking it behind me. The street was more alive now. People were heading into the diner. The general store was open for business. I felt conspicuous, like everyone could see the secrets I was carrying. I found Main Street easily. It was a picture postcard version of small-town America. The bakery was on a corner, the smell of fresh bread wafting out onto the street. Above it, a simple, painted sign read, Arthur Abernathy, Attorney at Law. I climbed the narrow, creaking staircase. The door at the top was frosted glass. I could see the silhouette of a person sitting at a desk inside. I knocked. A voice, calm and gravelly, called out, "It's open." I pushed the door and stepped inside. The office was as old-fashioned as the sign. It was lined with law books from floor to ceiling. The man behind the large oak desk was old, with a shock of white hair and kind, intelligent eyes behind thick glasses. He looked up at me, his expression neutral. "Can I help you, son?" he asked. "Are you Mr. Abernathy?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I am," he said, leaning back in his chair. It squeaked in protest. "My name is Leo Carver. My father was Tom Carver." At the mention of my father's name, the neutrality in his eyes shifted to a sharp, focused attention. He sat up straighter. "Tom's boy," he said, his voice softer now. "I'll be. I haven't seen you since you were knee-high. Your father, he told me you might come one day." "He left me a letter," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "He said I should trust you." Abernathy nodded slowly, his gaze unwavering. He gestured to the worn leather chair in front of his desk. "Sit down, Leo, and tell me everything." So I did. I told him about Karen, about the key, about the dilapidated store. I told him about the first letter, about Titan Construction, about the two choices my father had given me. I told him I had chosen option 2. I didn't mention the money, and I didn't tell him where the evidence was. Just that I had it. He listened without interruption, his hands steepled in front of him. His expression gave nothing away, but his eyes never left my face. When I finished, the office was silent, except for the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "Titan Construction," Abernathy said finally, the name tasting like something foul. "Your father was a brave man, Leo. Braver than he should have had to be." He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking tired. "He was right to be cautious. These are not people you trifle with. They have deep pockets and long arms." "Can you help me?" I asked, the question hanging in the dusty air. "Will you?" He put his glasses back on and looked me straight in the eye. "Your father was my friend. His father was my friend before him. Yes, I will help you. But you need to understand what you're asking. This isn't just a lawsuit. This is a war. It will be long, it will be ugly, and it will be dangerous. Are you prepared for that?" "I am," I said, and the words felt solid, true. He was my dad. A slow smile spread across Abernathy's face. It was the first real smile I'd seen since I arrived in this town. "Good," he said. "That's the answer I was hoping for. Now the first thing we need to do is secure that evidence. Then, we need to make you look like the last thing they'd ever be worried about." He leaned forward, a spark in his eye. "They think you're a broke, grieving kid who inherited a pile of junk. Let's let them think that. In fact, let's lean into it. What are your plans for the feed store?" I don't know," I stammered. "I was going to stay there." "Excellent," he said, clapping his hands together softly. "You're going to fix it up. You're going to become a local. You're going to sweep the floors and paint the walls and look like a boy with a hopeless project. You're going to hide in plain sight. And while you're doing that, I'm going to start making some calls. Quietly." Leaving Abernathy's office, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in days. I had an ally. I had a plan. The fear was still there, but now it had a direction. It was fuel. My first stop was the hardware store. It was an old place, with wooden floors that creaked and a smell of oil and sawdust. A man in overalls with a friendly, weathered face looked up from behind the counter. "Help you?" "I need cleaning supplies," I said. "A lot of them. Brooms, mops, buckets, trash bags, everything." The man, whose name tag read George, raised an eyebrow. "Tackling a big project?" "You could say that," I said. "I'm the new owner of the old feed store." George's face broke into a wide grin. "Tom Carver's boy. We heard you were in town. It's good to see that place getting some attention. Your dad was a good man. We all miss him around here." The simple, genuine warmth of his words almost knocked me over. In the city, no one had mentioned my dad for 2 years. Here, he was still a part of the community. "I'm Leo," I said, sticking out my hand. "George," he replied, his grip firm and calloused. "Anything you need, you just ask. We've got an account for the feed store. Your dad always paid up, but he left a small credit on it. Feel free to use it." I was stunned. A line of credit, a stranger's trust. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." I left the hardware store with a cart full of supplies and a feeling I hadn't had in a long, long time. The feeling of not being completely alone. The work was brutal. The first few days were just about clearing out the garbage. I filled dozens of heavy-duty trash bags with rotten paper, broken equipment, and layers upon layers of debris. Then came the sweeping. The dust was an entity in itself, a thick, choking cloud that coated my clothes, my skin, my lungs. I wore a mask I'd bought from George, but I still ended the day looking like a coal miner. After the sweeping came the scrubbing. I was on my hands and knees for days, scrubbing the wooden floors with hot water and heavy-duty soap, watching as decades of grime slowly gave way to the rich, scarred grain of the wood beneath. Every night, I'd collapse onto an old mattress I'd dragged into the office, too tired to even think. I'd eat canned soup heated over a small camp stove, and I'd fall asleep to the sounds of the old buildings settling around me. It was the hardest physical work I had ever done. But with every square foot of floor I reclaimed, with every clean surface that emerged from the filth, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. I wasn't just cleaning a store. I was preparing a battlefield. I was making a home. One afternoon, while I was washing the grime from the inside of the front display windows, a woman from the diner across the street came over with a plate covered in foil. "You've been working like a dog," she said, her voice warm and no nonsense. "Figured you could use a real meal." She handed me the plate. It was a hot roast beef sandwich with a side of potato salad. "I'm Martha," she said. "Your dad used to eat my roast beef sandwich 3 times a week." I ate that sandwich standing right there, leaning against the clean glass, and it was the best thing I had ever tasted. Martha and George became my first friends in Sparrow Creek. They'd check in on me, offer advice, and tell me stories about my dad. Small anecdotes about his terrible jokes, his kindness, his stubborn refusal to give up on the feed store, even when it seemed like a bad investment. Through their stories, a new picture of my father began to emerge. Not just the hero from the letter, but a man who was loved. A man who belonged here. Slowly, the feed store began to transform. Light now filled the main room, illuminating the clean floors and empty shelves. I had repaired the broken chair in the office and cleaned the desk. It was still sparse, still empty, but it was no longer a tomb. It was a space of possibility. And as the building changed, I changed with it. The work had made me stronger, leaner. The sun from working with the door open had tanned my skin. But the biggest change was on the inside. The self-doubt and fear that had haunted me were still there, but they were quieter now. They had been replaced by a steady, quiet resolve. One evening, I got a call from Abernathy. "Leo," he said, his voice low and serious. "I have a meeting tomorrow, a preliminary chat with some people from the district attorney's office. I've given them a teaser, nothing specific, just that a whistleblower's heir has come forward with substantial evidence of corporate malfeasance." My stomach tightened. "Is that safe?" "It's a calculated risk," he said. "We need to see if they have the appetite for a fight of this magnitude. And I need to put the fear of God into Titan. I'm going to leak to a financial reporter I trust that a major contractor is about to come under federal investigation. It will make their stock wobble. It will make them nervous. Nervous people make mistakes." "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, his voice firm. "You keep sweeping your floors. You keep being the boy with the hopeless project. You are my insurance policy, Leo. As long as they think you're just some harmless kid, the evidence is safe. Stay invisible. Stay invisible." It was the hardest thing to do. The next day, I tried to work, but my mind was a million miles away, in a conference room with my future hanging in the balance. I kept looking out the window, expecting to see black cars pulling up. But the street remained quiet. Martha brought me coffee. George dropped off a new set of light bulbs I had ordered. Life went on. The invisibility was my armor, and as I stood there, in the middle of my father's store, I finally understood the depth of his plan. He hadn't just left me money and evidence. He had left me a community. He had left me a role to play. He had left me a place to become the man he knew I could be. The worthless feed store wasn't a burden. It wasn't a ruin. It was my sanctuary. It was the place I was being saved. The call came late that night. It was Abernathy. I picked up on the first ring, my hand shaking. "It's on," he said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. "The DA is interested, very interested. The stock leak worked too. Titan's share price dropped 7% this afternoon. They're panicking. They're making calls, trying to find the source of the leak." A wave of relief and terror washed over me in equal measure. The first domino had fallen. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now, the real work begins," he said. "I'm putting together a team. We're going to need forensic accountants, engineers to verify your father's findings. It's going to take time, but we have them on the back foot. For now, your job remains the same. Stay put. Stay quiet. Let me be the monster in their closet." After we hung up, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the vast, empty space of the feed store, the moonlight streaming through the now clean windows, casting long shadows on the floor. The building didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt alive. It felt like it was on my side. I went back into the warehouse and looked at the sacks of money. The war chest. I thought about the hard drives hidden under the floorboards. The weapons. This place, this inheritance, was so much more than I could have imagined. My father had given me everything I needed, not just to survive, but to fight. He had armed me. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur of mundane labor and high-stakes tension. I finished cleaning the main floor and started on the warehouse. I sorted through the salvageable inventory, discovering that not all the seed was spoiled. Some of it, stored in sealed metal bins, was still good. I found old tools, a sturdy workbench, and boxes of hardware. The place was a treasure trove of forgotten utility. I started making small repairs, fixing the leaky tap in the small washroom, replacing the rotten boards on the front steps, patching the hole in the warehouse roof. Each task was a small victory, a way of pushing back against the decay, of asserting my presence. The town continued to embrace me in its quiet way. Martha insisted I eat at least one meal a day at the diner, refusing to let me pay most of the time. George gave me a running discount at the hardware store and taught me the difference between a lag bolt and a carriage bolt. People started to wave as they drove by. They no longer saw me as a stranger, but as Tom's boy, the kid who was trying to bring the old feed store back to life. They didn't know the real reason I was there, but their simple, unquestioning support was a shield. One day, a sleek, black sedan I didn't recognize cruised slowly past the store. It slowed down as it passed, and I could feel the eyes of the occupants on me. I was outside, painting the front door frame, trying to look as nonchalant as possible. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I forced myself to keep a steady hand, to move with the slow, deliberate pace of a boy with nothing but time. I didn't look up. I just kept painting. The car eventually moved on and disappeared around the corner. It was the first sign that they were looking for me. That night, I called Abernathy. "They're sniffing around," I told him. "Good," he said, his voice calm. "Let them look. What did they see?" "A kid painting a door," I said. "Exactly. A harmless kid. They'll look at you, look at this town, and they'll see nothing to worry about. They'll underestimate you. That's our greatest advantage." He was right, but it didn't make the fear go away. I started being more careful, varying my routines, always keeping an eye on the street. The feed store was my fortress, but I was beginning to feel like a prisoner in it. The weight of the secret was constant. I was living a double life. By day, I was the industrious handyman, the subject of fond town gossip. By night, I was the keeper of a secret that could get me killed. The loneliness of it started to wear on me. I had allies, but I was the one on the front line. It was my face they'd seen. It was my name on the deed. I started to really understand what my dad must have gone through. The isolation, the constant fear, the burden of knowing a terrible truth. He had done it all alone, for a year. I had only been doing it for a few months, and I was already cracking. One rainy afternoon, feeling particularly low, I was cleaning out the last of the junk from the office when I found something I'd missed. Tucked into the back of the Rolodex, behind the Z-tab, was a single, folded photograph. It was old and faded. It was a picture of my father and my mother. They were young, standing in front of this very store. But it wasn't dilapidated. It was new. The sign, Tom's Feed and Seed, was freshly painted. They were holding hands, and my dad was laughing, his head thrown back. My mom was looking at him, and her face was filled with so much love it was breathtaking. They were so young, so full of hope. And they were standing on the spot where I was sitting, in a building that represented their dream. This wasn't just my dad's final gamble, this was their beginning. This place had always been about hope. It had always been about love. And I realized my father hadn't sent me here to a place of failure and death. He had sent me back to his happiest memory. He had sent me to the source of his strength. Holding that photograph, I felt a profound shift inside me. The loneliness eased. I wasn't just fighting for justice for his death. I was fighting to protect their dream. I was fighting for the hope in that photograph. I carefully placed the photo on the clean desk, leaning it against the wall. It was the first personal item I had put on display. The office was no longer just an office. It was my father's room. It was my room. It was our home. That night, I made a decision. Hiding wasn't enough. I had to build. I went to Abernathy the next day. I want to reopen the store, I told him. He looked at me over his glasses, his expression unreadable. Leo, the plan was to lay low. I am laying low, I argued. What's less suspicious than a kid trying to make a go of his inheritance? It's the perfect cover. And I need this. I need to do more than just hide. I need to build something. For him. For me. Abernathy was silent for a long time. It's risky, he said finally. It will draw more attention. Let it, I said, my voice steady. They'll see a business, not a threat. They'll see a boy trying to make a living, not a man trying to get justice. He studied my face, then a slow smile spread across his lips. All right, son, he said. Let's open a feed store. And so began the next chapter. Reopening the store was a monumental task. With Abernathy's help, I navigated the paperwork for business licenses and permits. I used some of the war chest to place orders for new stock. George at the hardware store helped me draw up a list of what local farmers and gardeners would need. Martha helped me design a simple flyer to announce the grand reopening. The whole town seemed to get behind the project. People would stop by to offer advice or a helping hand. The day before the reopening, George and a couple of his friends came by with a brand new sign they had made for me. It was beautiful, carved from a single piece of oak. It read simply, Sparrow Creek Feed and Seed. Your dad's name is still on the building, George said, clapping me on the shoulder. But this is your place now, Leo. You've earned it. We hung the new sign as the sun was setting, and I felt a surge of pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. The store was ready. The shelves were stocked. The floors shone. Light poured from the windows into the evening twilight. It wasn't a ghost anymore. It was a living, breathing business. A beacon. The grand reopening was more successful than I could have ever dreamed. It felt like the entire town showed up. They didn't just come to look, they came to buy. They bought chicken feed, garden tools, bags of fertilizer. They came to support me. As I stood behind the old wooden counter, the same counter my father had stood behind, ringing up sales on a new digital register, I felt like I was finally in the right place. I was no longer hiding. I was standing in the open, surrounded by a community that had my back. I was home. The fight wasn't over. I knew that. Abernathy was still working tirelessly, building the case. The black sedan still made occasional, slow passes. The threat was real. But now, I wasn't just fighting against something. I was fighting for something. For my father's memory, for my mother's dream, for this town, for this store. I was fighting for my home. And that made all the difference. Looking back on it now, standing here in the doorway of my store, watching the sun go down over Sparrow Creek, it's hard to believe how much has changed. The legal battle with Titan Construction raged on for almost 2 more years. It was ugly, just as Abernathy had predicted. They tried everything to stop us. They tried to intimidate me, to discredit my father, to bury us in legal motions. But they had underestimated us. They had underestimated my father's meticulous evidence. They had underestimated Abernathy's skill and tenacity. And they had underestimated a kid with nothing to lose, backed by a small town that refused to let him stand alone. In the end, the truth came out. The case went federal. Executives were indicted. The company was forced into a massive restructuring and had to fund repairs on every project my father had identified. Justice was served. It didn't bring my dad back, but it honored his sacrifice. It made sure he didn't die for nothing. The store is thriving now. I've expanded, hired a couple of local kids to help out. It's become a center of the community, a place where people gather to talk and share news. It's more than a business. It's a legacy. Sometimes, late at night, I'll sit in the office and look at that old, faded photograph of my parents. I think about the journey that brought me here. Being kicked out on my 18th birthday felt like the end of the world. Karen thought she was throwing me away, saddling me with a worthless ruin. But what she saw as worthless was the most valuable thing I could have ever received. It wasn't about the building or the money or even the evidence. My real inheritance was a second chance. It was a path back to my father, a purpose, and a community that wrapped its arms around me when I needed it most. It taught me that home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you build. It's a place you fight for. It's the place where you find the truth of who you are. This whole journey started from a place of feeling completely worthless and alone. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe the world has told you that you don't matter, that what you have to offer isn't enough. I want you to look at this story, at this feed store, and know that what looks like a ruin can be the foundation for a fortress. The things people discard can be the very things that save you. Your story isn't over. Thank you for letting me share mine with you. If this resonated, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment below. Tell me about a time you found value where everyone else saw none. Tell me about your feed store. I'll be reading every single one because your stories matter. We're building a community here, and you are a part of it. You're not alone.